Paul Lynde brought laughter to millions from the center square of Hollywood squares across more than 1,000 episodes. Yet hidden behind each joke was something the television networks never wanted audiences to discover. In 1965, a young man fell 8 stories from a hotel window while Lynde watched. Police labeled it an accident, the press gave it minimal coverage, and Hollywood worked to ensure the true story remained hidden. For decades, a single interview existed that networks pulled from circulation, edited, and tried to erase entirely. That interview has now resurfaced, and Lynde's words within it reveal exactly why those in power were so frightened. Lynde's journey began in Mount Vernon, Ohio, and from the very start, nothing about his upbringing felt typical. Born June 13, 1926, he was the 5th of 6 children born to Corydon Lynde and Sylvia Bell Dupe. His father operated a busy meat market, cutting beef for customers throughout the day. But for 2 full years, he also held the position of local sheriff. Consequently, the family lived directly above the county jail, with prisoners locked up just beneath their apartment. At night, young Paul would hear shouting, metal bars rattling, and the rough sounds of men confined to their cells, while the lingering smell of meat from his father's work filled the air. This unusual combination of small-town existence, danger, and dark comedy left a lasting mark on him. Years afterward, family members would be laid to rest at Amity Cemetery, and Paul's ashes would eventually join them. Before any of that, however, he graduated from Mount Vernon High School in 1944, entering adulthood amid the fear and uncertainty of World War II. Even before high school, something had ignited within him. When Paul was approximately 4 or 5 years old, around 1930 or 1931, his mother Sylvia took him to see the re-released silent epic Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ. The original film had debuted in 1925, but sound had been added for this re-release. For a child growing up in a small Ohio town, the experience must have felt monumental. The movie ran more than 3 hours, featuring a massive chariot race involving 42 chariots and 250,000 feet of film, presenting an ancient spectacle so grand it seemed almost unbelievable. Paul later described that moment as the turning point. Watching Ramon Novarro and that world of drama and magnificence unfold before him, he realized he wanted to perform. From that moment forward, there was no turning back. He lost interest in ordinary children's games and became consumed with mimicry, repeating lines and scenes from the film over and over. That ambition remained with him throughout his school years, through the bass drum he played at Mount Vernon High, and through every subsequent step he took. Life then struck him brutally. His closest sibling was his older brother, Corydon George Lynde, known as Cordy, whom Paul viewed as a hero. In December 1944, only months after Paul graduated high school, Cordy died during the Battle of the Bulge at just 21 years old. That battle ranked among the bloodiest American engagements of World War II, with more than 19,000 U.S. soldiers perishing in the frozen Ardennes forest. The Germans launched their surprise attack on December 16th, trapping men in the snow as tanks clashed across the battlefield. Cordy vanished amid the chaos, and his body was never recovered. Initially listed as missing, he was later declared dead. Paul was only 18 when the telegram arrived, and the news destroyed him. The laughter they had once shared above that county jail disappeared instantly, and the grief never left him. It gave his humor a darker edge. He learned to mask pain with jokes, covering hurt with lines sharp enough to make audiences laugh before they looked too closely. Cordy, like Paul's parents later, would be buried at Amity Cemetery, and that loss remained with him forever. Only a few years afterward, tragedy struck the family again. In 1949, Paul lost both parents within months of each other. Hoy died first, sometime in the spring, followed by Sylvia during the summer. Records are not precise, but the 2 deaths occurred approximately 3 months apart. Both were only in their early 50s, taken by heart disease. Paul was just 23, suddenly orphaned while attempting to build a future in New York. He buried them beside Cordy, and the pattern of loss became impossible to overlook. It was no longer just grief. Fear had entered the picture as well. Heart disease had already claimed his parents at young ages, and later it would claim him too. On January 10, 1982, at 55 years old, Paul Lynde would suffer a fatal heart attack in his Beverly Hills home, repeating the very family pattern that had haunted him for years. When the film version of Bye Bye Birdie was released in 1963, Paul reprised his role as Harry McAfee. The movie grossed over $10 million at the box office, and his song Kids became a cult favorite, even though studio advertisements promoted Dick Van Dyke and Janet Leigh far more heavily than him. The film reached thousands of theaters, and suddenly millions recognized his face, even if they still could not name him. One critic later dubbed him the best-known unknown actor in America, a phrase that captures the strange position he had achieved. He was famous, but in an indirect way, people recognized the man, the voice, the twitch in his eyes, and the dry panic in his delivery, yet could not always identify him. That phenomenon only grew in the early and mid-1960s as television made him a regular presence. From roughly 1960 to 1965, Paul became one of those actors who seemed to appear everywhere. He guest starred on programs like Ben Casey, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and The Lucy Show, often playing the snarky neighbor, the nervous salesman, or the man just slightly too tense for the situation. By 1964, estimates suggested he was averaging more than a dozen guest roles per season. Audiences began recognizing his style long before learning his name. Letters would arrive addressed simply to the funny man who says you are a character. That kind of almost fame could be frustrating, but for Paul it proved useful. It kept him working, kept him visible, and set the stage for the character that would make him unforgettable to television viewers. In 1965, he appeared on Bewitched as Dr. Bombay, a driving instructor. But viewers responded so strongly to his delivery that producers reshaped his role on the show. Soon he became Uncle Arthur, a magical troublemaker with a campy streak and a gift for stealing scenes. By 1966, Uncle Arthur was a fan favorite, and by the late 1960s, he had appeared in more than 20 episodes, becoming one of the show's most recurring supernatural characters outside the main family. The performance was playful, flamboyant, and filled with coded energy that audiences picked up on, even though network television could never address it directly. That was the world Paul inhabited. The qualities people loved in him were often the same ones he had to keep unspoken. Privately, that pressure was real. Publicly, he joked about being the only bachelor in the witch world. Privately, he concealed his life because the industry had made clear what happened to openly gay stars. That double life followed him into film work as well. In 1964, he appeared in Send Me No Flowers alongside Doris Day and Rock Hudson, playing the overeager Mr. Basket. On screen, the movie was a tidy, straight romantic comedy. Off-screen, both Hudson and Lynde were closeted gay men navigating a system that demanded a specific image and punished anything deviating from it. Paul could portray cheerful chaos perfectly, but behind that performance lay the constant strain of pretending. On July 18, 1965, Paul Lynde was 39 years old and already climbing in Hollywood. But that night in San Francisco would remain with him for the rest of his life. Around 2:30 in the morning, after hours of moving from bar to bar, Lynde and his 24-year-old companion James Bing Davidson returned to their suite on the 8th floor of the Sir Francis Drake Hotel. Hotel security later described them as drunk and rowdy. Davidson had reportedly been drinking so heavily that his blood alcohol level was later estimated at 0.27, far above the legal driving limit of that era. Davidson was a young actor from Hastings, Nebraska, born on December 17, 1940. He enjoyed showing off, and that night he boasted that he could perform 100 chin-ups. There was not enough room inside to prove it, so he climbed toward the balcony or fire escape. What began as drunken fun turned to horror in seconds. Davidson hung by his fingers, trying to scare Lynde, but then he slipped. Lynde lunged for him and grabbed him, desperate to hold on, but he could not maintain his grip. Davidson fell 8 stories and struck the pavement below at about 3:15 that morning. He died instantly from massive injuries. 2 police officers witnessed it happen. The police ruled it an accident. That should have become a major story. A rising television actor had just watched a young man die outside his hotel room, yet almost nothing reached the press. In a year when celebrity tragedies were splashed across headlines everywhere, this one seemed to vanish. The silence protected Lynde at the exact moment his career was gaining real momentum. He had only recently begun appearing as Uncle Arthur on Bewitched, and the last thing the industry wanted was scandal attached to his name. What made the night even darker was the truth people were not permitted to say aloud. James Bing Davidson was not just a friend. He was Lynde's longtime romantic companion. In private, many in Hollywood understood that. In public, no one said it. That was the reality of the 1960s. A gay relationship could destroy a career overnight. So when Davidson died, Lynde had no safe way to grieve. He could not stand before cameras and speak honestly. He could not openly mourn the man he loved. He could not tell the public what it felt like to have Davidson slipping from his hands in those final seconds. And so the grief had nowhere to go. Friends offered quiet support, but even that support came wrapped in silence. Elizabeth Montgomery, who worked with him on Bewitched, remained loyal and kind, but she did not press him. Few people did. Lynde buried the whole thing deep inside himself. Outwardly, he kept performing. Inwardly, he carried the memory of that cold San Francisco pavement and the awful thought that he had been there, that he had reached for Davidson, and that it had not been enough. That loss transformed him. Before 1965, he drank socially. After that night, the drinking worsened. People around him noticed the shift. His humor grew sharper. His mood grew darker. The one-liners were still there, still brilliant, still perfectly timed. But behind them, there was now something harder and sadder. By the time he became one of the defining faces of Hollywood squares, millions saw the wit and the wicked grin, but almost nobody knew what lay behind it. That hidden pain shaped the remainder of his life. Lynde had already built a reputation as a quick, funny performer, but Hollywood squares turned him into a household name. Born on June 13, 1926 in Mount Vernon, Ohio, he had taken a long road to fame, doing stage work, screen work, and scene-stealing supporting parts. Then came Bewitched, where he first appeared as Uncle Arthur in 1965, and then came the role that locked him into television history. In 1966, he began appearing as the center square, and over the years, he delivered more than 1,000 episodes full of zingers that made audiences howl. His style was unmistakable. He answered innocent questions with lines that sounded silly on the surface, but carried a second meaning for anyone paying attention. That was part of the magic. Straight audiences laughed because he was outrageous. Gay audiences often heard something deeper, a wink hidden inside the joke. He had found a way to exist in plain sight while still remaining hidden. It was clever, risky, and exhausting all at once. The act brought him fame, but it also trapped him. He knew how valuable he was to the show, yet he also knew the show allowed him to be only one version of himself. That frustration never truly left him. Still, the life beneath the jokes kept growing more fragile. Even his loyal success on Hollywood squares could not hide the fact that he was worn down. By 1979, he had become tired of being boxed in and stepped away from the show. Ratings suffered. Producers realized how badly they still needed him and eventually brought him back with better billing. It was a small victory, and for a moment it seemed like he might steady himself. Then came a change nobody expected. In early 1980, Lynde quit drugs and alcohol. After years of chaos, he got sober. Friends saw a calmer man, sharper in a different way, more private, but more grounded. It did not erase the past, and it did not undo the damage, but it gave him a stretch of relative peace. For the first time in years, there was at least the possibility that he might move forward without the bottle controlling him. He returned to work during that period, including later episodes of Hollywood Squares, and there was a sense that he was trying to reclaim some dignity after years of public stumbles. The jokes were still there, the timing was still there, but now there was also age, weariness, and the quiet knowledge of what he had survived. He remained funny, but the laughter around him no longer covered everything. Then, just as things seemed a little steadier, his life ended. On January 10, 1982, Paul Lynde died at his Beverly Hills home at the age of 55. Friends became worried when he missed a birthday gathering and did not answer calls. Eventually, they entered his house and found him dead in bed. The cause was a heart attack. There were tabloid whispers afterward, as there always were around him, but the central truth was painfully simple. After years of making millions laugh, he died alone. That final detail seems to fit too neatly with the sadness that had followed him for so long. He had spent years entertaining huge audiences while hiding the biggest truths of his life. He lost the man he loved in 1965 and was never allowed to grieve in public. He built a career on wit while carrying private guilt. He turned coded humor into stardom while living in a world that made honesty dangerous. He drank to escape it, lashed out when the pain spilled over, then finally got sober only a short time before his death. And because so much of his life had been hidden while he was alive, much of the fuller story emerged only after he was gone. Biographies, documentaries, and later interviews began filling in the gaps. They showed a man far more wounded and far more complicated than the campy television persona people thought they knew. They showed how much Hollywood took from him, even while profiting from him. They showed the cost of forcing a gifted man to be visible and invisible at the same time.